Okay, well, normally we wouldn't leave these expressions blank, but you are allowed to. So what would we put there typically? Well, normally the step expression is where we would put this information, which is how we want the variable to change during each iteration of the loop. So right here, I'm going to write num plus equals 5. And I want you to notice now I've turned this line of code off. Now, if this were a while loop, I would have just created an infinite loop by turning off that line of code, because I would have just been stuck on 25. But in a for loop, the step expression is looking to execute at the end of each iteration, which is perfect. I'm going to print 25, and then at the end of that pass, the step expression will change num to 30, so the next time through it will print 30, and so on and so on. So if I run this now, I get an identical output to what I had before. Okay, absolutely identical. And part of me doing that was I took advantage of the for loop's expectation of a step expression in its structure. Okay, so I guess the next question would be, what's the initializing expression used for? Well, this is where I would likely give num its initial value. Okay, earlier I had done that up here. I could actually remove that now and just simply declare num to be an int, and then I'll use the loop to initialize num to 25. Okay, so let's run this now. Let's see if this does the exact same thing. Exactly the same. Notice that the first print was 25. It didn't start with 20 or 15 or something else or 30. It started with 25, ended at 100, and it exited at 105, which again is identical to what we saw in the while loops. So everything's working really nicely here. Okay? Now, there are some other things going on. I'm going to explain those in a minute, but let's just kind of highlight again what all of those things are. So you have something called your initializing expression. Okay? The initializing expression is read only once. Okay? Only once at the very beginning. So at the very beginning of your loop process, the initializing expression gets read, and in this case, num gets initialized to 25. Okay, your control expression is read before, okay, each iteration of your loop. So it's read before. And like we've seen before, the control expression must be true for you to iterate the loop. If it's not true, you immediately exit the loop structure. So every time you encounter true, you run the loop. The very first time you see false, it's all over and your loop's done. Okay? And then the step expression, which is that third piece of information, okay, that gets read after each iteration of the loop. It's the very last thing to happen. So when your loop finishes its iteration and it hits its closing brace, that's the moment that the step expression gets enacted. Now, that's very important to understand the order of that process, because that's why we printed 25 the first time and not 30, okay? Because it didn't step until after the iteration was done. So the very first time through the loop, it printed 25. When it hit this closing brace is when it changed it to 30. That's also why we exit to 105, okay? 100 enters the loop and prints. Then it became 105. Then we checked the control expression one more time. We said, okay, 105 is not less than or equal to 100. And so when we exited, that's why we saw 105 at the end. So this is your basic structure right here of a for loop. And those are the three key pieces: the initializing expression, the control expression, and the step expression.